Sarah Mitchell stared at her computer screen, the fluorescent lights of the open office reflecting off her glasses as she checked her email for the 5th time that morning. Another meeting invite had appeared in her inbox. This one marked urgent from her boss, Julian. The subject line made her stomach tighten. Q3 strategy presentation, lead analyst required. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. She knew what this meant. Someone would have to present the data findings to the executive team, and as the senior analyst on the project, that someone would be her. At 32, Sarah had built a reputation at Meridian Analytics as the wizard behind the numbers, the one who could spot patterns no one else could see. What her colleagues didn't know was that every insight she'd ever contributed had come through email threads, private messages to her boss, or quiet comments during meetings that were often repeated louder by someone else who would then receive the credit. In 7 years, she had never once stood in front of the room. Chicago's financial district buzzed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian's 27th floor office. The September sun cast long shadows across Lake Michigan, visible in the distance. Sarah's desk was positioned in the corner, facing away from the common area. Her own design, a barrier between her 250-pound frame and the judging eyes she always felt were watching. "Hey, Sarah, did you get Julian's email?" Mia leaned against the partition, her sleek blazer and confident posture making her look like she'd walked straight out of a corporate brochure. Mia had joined the company just 18 months ago and already had the ear of the executive team. "Yeah, just saw it," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Looks important. It's the Patterson account. Biggest client we've landed in years," Mia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Julian told me he's thinking of putting you in charge of the presentation. Your data models are exactly what they're looking for." The compliment should have made Sarah proud, but instead, panic spread through her chest like wildfire. "Me? I don't think... there are better presenters on the team." Mia's eyebrow arched. "Better presenters, maybe. Better analysts. Not a chance. Look, the meeting's in 3 weeks. That's plenty of time to prepare." She squeezed Sarah's shoulder before walking away, oblivious to the anxiety attack brewing beneath Sarah's calm exterior. Later that afternoon, Julian confirmed what Mia had said. In his corner office, with its view of the Chicago skyline, he pushed a folder across his desk toward Sarah. "This is your chance to shine. The Patterson account needs someone who understands the nuances of their market data. That's you." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Julian, I appreciate the opportunity, but my strength is in the analysis, not the delivery. Maybe Mia or Derek..." "Sarah," Julian interrupted, leaning forward, "I've been getting your reports for years. The insights are brilliant, but at some point you need to step up and own them. The executive team doesn't want to hear from me or Mia. They want to hear from the person who actually did the work." His expression softened. "What's holding you back?" "Everything," she wanted to say. The way people's eyes shifted from her face to her body and back again, the subtle shift in their expression when they realized the voice of the brilliant analyst came from someone who didn't fit their image of success. The fear that the moment she stood up, all anyone would see was her size, not her mind. Instead, she said, "I just don't have much presentation experience." Julian nodded, accepting the half-truth. "Well, now's the time to get some. Look, I'm not throwing you to the wolves. We'll have run-throughs, practice sessions, but this needs to be your project." On the train ride home to her apartment in Lakeview, Sarah scrolled through her phone, barely registering the familiar Chicago Transit Authority announcements. An email notification popped up, the calendar invite for the first preparation meeting for the Patterson presentation. 3 weeks, 21 days to overcome a lifetime of hiding. Her apartment greeted her with silence. It was a small, one-bedroom, but neat and filled with books, her refuge. Sarah dropped her bag and kicked off her shoes, heading straight to the refrigerator. The routine was familiar, stress eating to numb the anxiety. She paused, her hand on the refrigerator door, and instead turned toward her laptop. Public speaking tips. she typed into the search bar. Thousands of results appeared, most promising the same thing. Overcome your fear in 5 easy steps, or speak like a pro overnight. None addressed the real issue, how to make people see past her size to her intellect. After an hour of useless articles, a different kind of ad caught her eye. Find your voice at Chicago Improv Workshop. All bodies, all voices welcome. Sarah stared at the screen. Improv. The thought of performing made her throat close up. But the tagline resonated. It's not about being funny, it's about being heard. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah clicked register and entered her information for the session scheduled for that weekend. As she pressed submit, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Dinner on Sunday? Dad's making his famous pot roast. Sarah sighed, typing back a quick yes, knowing the meal would come with the usual side of subtle comments about her weight and perpetual singlehood. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the upcoming presentation pressing down on her chest, heavier than her own body ever could. Something had to change, not just for this presentation, but for herself. She was tired of being invisible, of her voice being as muffled as she felt her body was too visible. If improv couldn't help her, nothing would. With that thought, she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with faceless executives and endless boardroom tables where she could never quite reach the podium. The Chicago Improv Workshop operated out of a renovated warehouse in Bucktown, the kind of neighborhood where industrial grit met artistic aspiration. Sarah stood outside the brick building, checking the address on her phone one more time, as if hoping she'd made a mistake. A steady stream of people flowed through the entrance, some looking like they belonged on stage, others looking as nervous as she felt. First time, a woman with curly grey hair and bright red glasses approached, holding the door open. Her name tag read, Evelyn Instructor. Sarah nodded, clutching her purse tightly. That obvious, huh? Only because you're still outside, Evelyn replied with a warm smile. The hardest part is walking through the door. The rest is just playing. The workshop space was larger than Sarah expected. An open room with high ceilings, exposed beams, and a small raised platform at one end. About 20 people milled around, arranging chairs in a circle. What struck Sarah immediately was the diversity of the group. Different ages, ethnicities, body types. She wasn't the largest person in the room, nor the smallest. For once, she didn't feel like the outlier. Welcome, everyone! Evelyn clapped her hands, drawing attention to the center of the circle. For those new to Chicago Improv Workshop, I'm Evelyn, and my job is to help you find the voice you already have. Improv isn't about being someone else. It's about being the most authentic version of yourself. The first exercise seemed simple. State your name and one thing you love. When Sarah's turn came, her voice emerged as barely a whisper. I'm Sarah. I love data analysis. A few people chuckled, but not unkindly. That's interesting, Evelyn said. What about data analysis do you love? Sarah hadn't expected a follow-up question. I love finding the story in the numbers. When everyone else sees random figures, I see patterns, connections. It's like solving a puzzle that tells you something important about the world. Evelyn beamed. Now that was a voice I could hear. Remember that feeling? That's passion cutting through fear. Nushu. The 3-hour workshop progressed through increasingly challenging exercises. By the time they did their first actual improv scene, Sarah had spoken more to strangers than she had in months at her office. The exercise required her to have a fictional argument with Marcus, a theater student half her age and half her size, about who would get the last cookie at a bake sale. You don't understand, Sarah found herself saying, her voice growing stronger as the scene progressed. I've calculated the exact caloric and emotional satisfaction ratio of this cookie, and it's precisely what I need to finish my dissertation. The group erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt a rush she hadn't experienced before. The power of being heard, of commanding attention, not because of how she looked, but because of what she said. After class, Evelyn approached her. "You did wonderfully for a first-timer. Will we see you next week?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "This was fun, but I'm not sure how it helps me in the real world. I have this presentation at work and—" "Ah," Evelyn nodded knowingly. "The real world excuse. Let me tell you something, Sarah. This is the real world. These exercises, they're not about pretending. They're about removing the filters and fears that prevent you from being authentic. The Sarah who argued passionately about that cookie is the same Sarah who understands data patterns. She just needs permission to speak up." On Sunday, Sarah sat at her parents' dining table in their suburban Evanston home, pushing pot roast around her plate, while her mother, Eleanor, talked about her book club's latest selection, a self-help book about transformation. The author lost 150 pounds and completely changed her life, Eleanor said, casting a meaningful glance at Sarah. "I could lend it to you, if you're interested." Sarah's father, Robert, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sarah doesn't need— "It's not just about weight," Eleanor continued. "It's about taking control of your life, speaking up for yourself. You know, the things we've talked about. Something about the improv class, about finding her voice in that safe space, gave Sarah the courage to respond differently than she usually would. Instead of mumbling an excuse or changing the subject, she set down her fork. "Mum, I know you're trying to help, but I don't need a book to tell me how to transform my life. In fact, I'm already working on that. I've been put in charge of a major presentation at work, and I'm taking an improv class to help with my public speaking." The silence that followed was worth the momentary discomfort of speaking up. Her mother looked genuinely surprised, and her father's face broke into a proud smile. "Improv?" her father asked. "That sounds like fun. When can we come see you perform?" "It's not that kind of improv, Dad," Sarah laughed. "It's more about communication skills. But the first class was liberating." On Monday morning, Sarah sat in the conference room with Julian and the rest of the analysis team, discussing the approach for the Patterson presentation. When Julian asked for input on how to frame the market trend data, Sarah found herself raising her hand slightly, not fully up, but not hidden under the table either. "I think we should lead with the regional variations," she suggested, her voice steadier than usual. "The East Coast numbers tell a completely different story than the Midwest, and that's the key insight Patterson needs for their expansion strategy." Julian looked at her with a mixture of surprise and approval. "That's a great angle, Sarah. Why don't you flesh that out for the first section of the presentation?" Walking back to her desk, Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety, but underneath it, something new, a small ember of excitement. She pulled up the Chicago Improv Workshop schedule and registered for the next 3 sessions. 3 weeks until the presentation. 3 more chances to find her voice. That night, instead of her usual takeout dinner eaten in front of Netflix, Sarah called her college roommate, Tanya, whom she hadn't spoken to in months. "An improv class? You?" Tanya sounded incredulous over the phone. "The same Sarah who used to send me into grocery stores to ask where things were because you didn't want to talk to strangers." "People change," Sarah said, surprised at her own defensiveness. "I'm not criticizing," Tanya backpedaled. "I'm impressed. It's just unexpected." "What brought this on?" Sarah explained about the presentation, expecting Tanya to offer sympathy about how terrible public speaking was. Instead, her friend said something that stuck with her long after they hung up. "You know, Sarah, you've always acted like your body takes up too much space, so you've made your voice take up less to compensate. But what if you deserve all the space, physical and audible, that you naturally occupy?" That night, Sarah wrote the phrase on a post-it note and stuck it to her bathroom mirror. "I deserve the space I occupy." It felt like a radical concept, one that would take more than a few improv classes to truly believe, but for the first time in years, it seemed possible. The second improv workshop built on the first, pushing Sarah further out of her comfort zone. This time, the exercises focused on status, how people communicate power and confidence through body language, voice, and word choice. "Stand like you own the room," Evelyn instructed the group. "Now stand like you're apologizing for being in it. Feel the difference?" Sarah felt it in every muscle. Her default posture, shoulders hunched, eyes down, arms crossed over her stomach, was the physical embodiment of apology. Standing tall, shoulders back, making eye contact, it felt like an act of defiance. "Now let's pair up for a status exercise," Evelyn continued. "One person starts with high status, the other with low. During the scene, try to flip the dynamic without explicitly discussing status." Sarah was paired with Diego, a charismatic advertising executive who naturally commanded attention. Their scenario: a customer and a restaurant manager discussing a complaint. Diego took the role of the indignant customer, while Sarah played the manager. Diego began with classic high-status behavior: loud voice, expansive gestures, direct eye contact. "This is completely unacceptable. I've been coming to this restaurant for years, and I've never been treated this way." Sarah's instinct was to cower, to apologize immediately. Instead, she remembered the techniques Evelyn had demonstrated. She kept her voice calm and steady, maintained eye contact, and didn't rush her words. "I understand you're upset, sir, and you have every right to be. That's exactly why I want to hear exactly what happened, so I can make it right." She took a deliberate step forward, not into his personal space, but enough to establish her presence. As the scene progressed, Sarah maintained her composure while validating Diego's concerns. Gradually, his energy shifted. His voice lowered, his gestures became less expansive. By the end of the scene, he was sitting down, looking up at her, accepting her offer of a complimentary meal. "Excellent status flip," Evelyn called out when they finished. "Sarah, what did you do that worked so well?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I didn't match his emotion, but I didn't dismiss it either. I stayed in my authority without using it against him." "That's exactly right," Evelyn nodded. "Authority doesn't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one people lean in to listen to." At work, the preparation for the Patterson presentation intensified. Sarah began applying what she was learning in improv to her interactions with colleagues. In planning meetings, she practiced taking up her rightful space, physically and verbally. She stopped prefacing her ideas with, "This might be stupid, but," or "I'm not sure if this makes sense." Julian noticed the change. After a particularly productive strategy session, where Sarah had confidently defended her analysis approach against Derek's alternative, he stopped by her desk. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he said with an approving nod. "The team's responding to you differently. They're seeing what I've seen all along." The third improv workshop focused on storytelling, finding the heart of a narrative and delivering it authentically. For the final exercise, each participant had to tell a 2-minute personal story about a moment of unexpected confidence. When Sarah's turn came, she surprised herself by sharing something she'd never told anyone at work. 2 years ago, my mother had surgery, and I had to become her advocate in the hospital. There was a mix-up with her medication, and I had to confront the medical staff, doctors, nurses, administrators. I was terrified, but it wasn't about me anymore. It was about protecting someone I loved. She described how she'd stood her ground, insisting on speaking directly with the attending physician, documenting every conversation, and refusing to leave until the situation was resolved. "I never knew I could be that person," she concluded. "I always thought confidence had to come from within, but sometimes it comes from caring more about something else than about your own fear." After the workshop, Evelyn pulled her aside. "That story about your mother, that's your key. When you present at work, find the part of the data that you care about protecting or advocating for. Make it about that, not about you." With just 1 week left before the Patterson presentation, Sarah had a breakthrough. Late one night at the office, reviewing the market analysis data for the 100th time, she saw it, a pattern in the consumer behavior metrics that everyone else had missed. The insight would completely change Patterson's approach to their new product line, potentially saving them millions in misdirected marketing. Excitement overrode her usual hesitation. She immediately drafted an email to Julian outlining her discovery, then stopped before sending it. No, this wasn't something to bury in an email. This was something to say out loud, to own. The next morning, she asked Julian for 10 minutes of his time. In his office, she didn't sit down as she usually would, shrinking into the guest chair. Instead, she remained standing and walked him through her findings, using his whiteboard to illustrate the pattern. "This changes everything about our recommendation," she concluded, "and I want to be the one to present it to the Patterson team." Julian leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I never doubted you would be, but I'm glad you're not doubting it anymore either." The final improv workshop before the presentation felt like a culmination. The exercises were more challenging, the feedback more precise. Sarah found herself volunteering first for exercises, making bold choices in scenes, and laughing, really laughing, at herself when she made mistakes. At the end of the session, Evelyn asked each person to share one thing they were taking away from the workshop series. When Sarah's turn came, she didn't have to think about it. "I'm taking away the understanding that my voice doesn't have to apologize for my body, and my body doesn't have to apologize for existing. They're both just me, taking up exactly the amount of space I'm meant to occupy in the world." The night before the presentation, Sarah laid out her outfit, a cobalt blue dress with a structured jacket she'd bought specially for the occasion. Not black, not minimizing, not hiding. For the first time in her professional life, she wasn't trying to disappear. She practiced her presentation one last time in front of her bathroom mirror, making eye contact with herself throughout. The data told a compelling story, and now, finally, she felt worthy of telling it. The day of the Patterson presentation arrived with a clarity that surprised Sarah. Instead of the tornado of anxiety she had expected, she felt a strange calm, not the absence of fear, but something existing alongside it. A newfound confidence that didn't require fear to disappear, only to make room for it. The conference room on Meridian's top floor offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, the morning sun glinting off Lake Michigan. 8 executives from Patterson Industries sat around the polished table, along with Julian and 3 other Meridian senior staff. Sarah arranged her materials at the head of the table, aware of the eyes watching her, but no longer consumed by what they might be thinking. Julian opened with brief introductions, then turned to her. "And now, Sarah Mitchell, our lead data analyst, will walk you through our findings and strategic recommendations." Sarah took a deep breath, recalling Evelyn's advice from their final improv session. "Don't try to be perfect, try to be present." "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "For the past 6 weeks, I've been analyzing your consumer engagement patterns across all 50 states. She clicked to her first slide, a visualization she had designed to highlight the regional discrepancies. What we discovered challenges some fundamental assumptions about your target demographic. As she moved through the presentation, Sarah felt herself settle into a rhythm. She wasn't performing, she was conversing, telling the story the data had revealed to her. When questions came, she didn't panic or defer to Julian as she might have done before. She listened carefully, responded thoughtfully, and when she didn't know an answer, she simply said so, promising to follow up. The breakthrough moment came when Richard Patterson himself, CEO and grandson of the company's founder, interrupted her to challenge her analysis of the Midwest market trends. "These numbers can't be right," he said, frowning at the screen. "We've been operating in the Midwest for 40 years. Our brand recognition is strongest there." In the past, Sarah would have immediately backpedaled, questioned her own analysis, or looked to Julian for rescue. Today, she did none of those things. Instead, she nodded respectfully and pulled up a supplementary slide she had prepared for just such a challenge. I understand your concern, Mr. Patterson. Your brand recognition is indeed highest in the Midwest, which makes these findings even more significant. She displayed a chart showing the disconnect between brand recognition and actual purchasing behavior. Your customers know who you are, but they're not buying what you're selling, at least not in the way you expect them to. She walked through the data point by point, explaining how consumer preferences had shifted dramatically in the last 5 years, creating an opportunity for Patterson to pivot their product strategy to meet these new demands. By the time she concluded, Richard Patterson was no longer frowning. He was leaning forward, engaged, asking questions that built on her analysis rather than challenging it. The rest of the executives followed his lead, and what had been scheduled as a 1-hour presentation extended to nearly 2 hours of productive discussion. When the meeting finally ended, Richard Patterson approached her directly. "Ms. Mitchell, that was enlightening. Uncomfortable, but enlightening. We need more of that kind of direct challenge. Julian tells me you're the architect of this entire analysis." "Yes," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze. "I believe in what the data is telling us, and I believe in Patterson's ability to adapt to these market shifts." He nodded approvingly. "We'd like you to be involved in the implementation phase as well. Someone who understands the why behind the strategy will be invaluable as we work through the how." After the Patterson team departed, the Meridian conference room erupted in congratulations. Julian clapped her on the shoulder. "That," he said emphatically, "is what I've been waiting to see for 7 years." Even Mia seemed genuinely impressed. "The way you handled Patterson's objection was masterful, like you knew exactly what he was going to say and had the perfect response ready." Sarah smiled. "I just prepared for the conversation, not just the presentation." That evening, Sarah met Evelyn for coffee at a small cafe near the improv workshop space. She recounted the presentation, still riding the high of her success. "So the improv techniques really worked," Evelyn said, sipping her latte. "I'm not surprised, but I am delighted." "It wasn't just the techniques," Sarah replied. "It was the permission to take up space, to have a voice, to stop apologizing for existing." Evelyn studied her thoughtfully. "You know, most people come to improv thinking it's about becoming someone else, someone funnier, more outgoing, more confident, but it's really about stripping away the artifice and finding who you already are beneath the fear." "I'm still 250 pounds, Sarah said matter-of-factly. "That hasn't changed." "And it doesn't need to for you to command a room," Evelyn replied. "What changed was your relationship with that fact. It's no longer the most important thing about you to yourself." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of the Chicago Improv Workshop's Friday night audience. The showcase featured scenes and monologues from students in all of Evelyn's classes, and Sarah had volunteered to participate, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. For her segment, she performed a 3-minute monologue about a data analyst who discovers she can hear the stories behind the numbers, the human lives represented in each percentage point and bar graph. It was funny, touching, and deeply personal. As applause filled the small theater, Sarah caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Julian was there, along with Mia and several other colleagues from Meridian. Her parents sat in the front row, her father wiping away what appeared to be a tear. Tanya had driven in from Milwaukee for the occasion. After the showcase, they gathered at a nearby restaurant to celebrate. Sarah's mother, who had always been quick with diet suggestions and thinly veiled criticisms about her appearance, seemed to be seeing her daughter with new eyes. "I've never seen you like this," Eleanor said quietly, as the others chatted around them. "So, in command of yourself." "I've always been this person, Mom," Sarah replied. "I just couldn't hear my own voice over all the other noise." The following Monday, Sarah arrived at work to find an email from Julian. The subject line read, "Director of Data Strategy, interested." The body of the email was brief. "Creating a new position. Need someone who can translate data into action. After what you did with Patterson, you're the obvious choice. Let's discuss." Sarah stared at the screen, a smile spreading across her face. She thought about the journey of the past few months, from hiding behind her computer to commanding a boardroom, from whispering her ideas to speaking them boldly, from apologizing for her existence to owning her space in the world. Her weight hadn't changed. The number on the scale was the same, but the weight of silence, of self-doubt, of constant apology, that was gone. And in its place was something far more valuable, her voice, finally unleashed. She clicked reply and typed 2 words, absolutely interested. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out the worn post-it note she'd written after her first improv class. I deserve the space I occupy. She no longer needed the reminder. She lived it now, in every word she spoke, in every room she entered. At 250 pounds, Sarah Mitchell had found what no diet book or weight loss program could ever give her, the unshakable knowledge that her value had never been about the space her body occupied, but about the room her voice could fill when she finally allowed it to be heard.